What I hear a lot of, and it kind of links back to the omnichannel thing we discussed before, is like there's just a ton of fake work, right? And what I mean by that is like there's a lot of people doing stuff, but it's not having any impact, and they're doing it because it's like self-serving, right? So original point, there's too many reps. Why is there too many reps? There's too many reps because reps are not used necessarily, I mean, it's controversial, to generate impact. Reps are used so that we've got more people having more meetings with more doctors and sending more emails, which makes everyone feel like we have good engagement with our customer base. So like we got to try to understand, I think, one, like I agree, like less reps would make sense in if I think about the reality for healthcare professionals, like they're super busy, and like what's the value in having a conversation with a rep for the doctor? Like it's not very often, and the reality like is that reps are not like, they're not consultants. Like if I'm a consultant doctor like 20, 30 years, I'm speaking to a medical rep, like, and they come into the office and they say to me like, "Hey, did you know that like you should test your patient like 4 times?" And this is it's like, I'm like, get out. Like, so I can't believe that these interactions, and like, even when the e details that we produce in our agency, right? And yeah, the product information makes sense and all that stuff. Like, it's just, it feels like everything's should be reactive, but it's very proactive. And some of it's like the unmet need is like, let me tell you about this patient group. It's like, I've been working in this for 30 years. Why don't I tell you about the unmet need? So I think, what are these reps actually doing? And if it's just making calls and like having those relationships, it's not working. And I think first thing is like reduce the number, but change the role, like change the concept from a sales rep who's trying to sell a product to an account manager who is managing the customer's experience, access, solutions to the product and the patient group, right? So then what you've got is maybe less people in a slightly more sophisticated role where they're able to provide solutions. And those people maybe will be more empowered, and the role should include being able to go to marketing and say, look, like I have 4 accounts that I manage. This is their biggest pain point. We need to start creating content and solutions to that. Oh, and by the way, like this is like a doctor who's really like, he's grasped this concept. Why don't you partner with them to make the content? So you kind of change the role a bit and you have less of them. And anyway, I would say if we're doing omnichannel, which in my opinion would mean that we're able to react to inbound relevant requests for information. So i.e., a doctor attends a webinar, we use the example of webinar, attends a webinar about wanting to understand more about treatment guidelines in X disease, then therefore we know that doctor is interested in that disease, wants to learn more about that disease, and maybe interested in product information. Reps should be going after all the people who interacted with that webinar as their priority, not sending out as many emails as they can to doctors who are literally have no interest whatsoever in the therapy at the moment. So for me, it's like most of those communications must be outbound. Therefore, the role of the rep is basically a lead generator. They use the reps to drive engagement, whereas they should be using marketing to drive engagement. So that's where the wider funnel is. You know what I mean? So it's like more marketing activity with more specific, relevant, and valuable rep activity would be the way forward. Based on what we're talking about, like to me, that would be making a lot more sense. And I know we kind of jump into the topics, but I also wanted to talk about the global to local thing, because that's something that winds me up a little bit. And again, I think global teams are getting away with murder at the moment. I don't think they're producing brand campaigns and core assets. Whereas like you guys are supposed to be the top strategists. You should be providing a framework every year based on your knowledge of channels, your knowledge of customer interactions, your knowledge of every individual market. You should be saying, we know we have markets that have this capability, markets have that capability, and then markets have 3 tiers. You should be providing a channel mix, omni-channel tactical deployment strategy for each of those marketing mixes and saying, this is how we'd advise doing it. We'd advise you use webinars. We have, these type of email assets. You have a website, and we're going to prepare you with some content, some core content that works across these channels. And then, that allows then the marketing teams to be a little bit more flexible with the content, but it gives them more, they have more available to them. They have a deployment plan, not just a load of key messages and an e-detail and a poster. that they then adapt. Like I honestly think like it's pretty nuts, like what global provides to local teams, given the amount of budget that they have and the responsibility that they have at the moment. I rarely see any brand managers at a global level saying, "Hey, do you know what? Like here's your kind of omni-channel deployment mix based on our knowledge of your market that you'll be able to use to deploy all your content, and even a calendar. You should start here. Like you said, Yasin, earlier, it's like, okay, we're saying we're launching, right? So webinars is the big thing for us. So what we've done for you is we've created a omni-channel pathway for webinar to rep engagement to website, and we're giving you the core assets for that. And now you can maybe tweak the themes of your webinars a bit to work with your audience, but you're still going to use the same pathway. They don't do that. They just give the messages and the big creative, and then they do global conferences.
Yeah,
I think.
well, so yeah, I mean, so again, a lot there to cover. There's a few things I was trying to almost link to there. So I'm going to slightly defend global a little bit. I don't often do this. I'm going to slightly defend global there and kind of link it back to the whole talk about webinars at a local level, let's say. So I think all too often I've seen where people are measuring their activities very much without the full information. So like we talked about earlier, like, yeah, webinars don't work, let's say, because the success was that to get how many attendees we have, right? That was the success metric. And then, but people aren't looking further into, okay, yeah, this was the topic of the webinar and this was kind of in this place of the, let's say, adoption funnel or whatever you want to call it. And then none of that was tagged correctly as well. And so you weren't inviting the right people to it, first of all. The topic was wrong. The way you sold the webinar was so broad that no one knew why they would come to it. So all of that, none of that data was there at a local level. It's been measured incorrectly. It's been written off as a channel. And so your point, linking back up to global, in terms of global should know exactly what's going on in all these countries and have insight into what's working, what's not. They don't, because actually, first of all, the local countries don't even know themselves because they're not looking at it. But then also they're vocally probably not sharing with global, because I think I've been as a local country. I've been in both roles, local country and global. As a local country, you don't really want to tell global what you're doing. You kind of don't want the eyes on you. You want to just do your own thing almost. And global don't push it as much either, unless they're with some of the key markets as well. And then they kind of just hear what they want to hear. And then again with global as well, I think the way they're measured again, like I mentioned, I've been in a global role, is kind of like the accountability for content that gets delivered for them is the delivery of that content. It isn't even reuse. No one, while people are looking at reuse rates, no one is really held accountable. I think local markets are held more accountable than it should be equal, to be honest. So that's kind of what I've seen there in that perspective. So yeah, a few things there that I was kind of thinking about. I don't know, Yasin, you're kind of nodding along there as well.
Yeah, I was nodding along because I don't necessarily agree 100% with what you said, Dan, even though there's a lot of truth in what was said, because I do see still global as the strategist, like you said, but also the overall content provider based on those strategies and the insights that are generated on a global level. However, then indeed we have an issue with the localization. Everyone is aware of it, but no one is held accountable for now. But I do believe it starts with the brand plans, because the brand plans very often, it's a monstrous exercise. But the only thing that happens is everyone puts a timeline. They say at this point of time, we will have this activity, period. They don't say, and that's something I'm advocating a lot for, every activity you do is about driving change in behavior, ideally, or change in mindset, in share of voice, in thought leadership, in lead generation, whatever metric you put against. And we don't actually say what we want to achieve with a specific activity. From creating a global, for example, content pack or content distribution, or however it's called in any organization. And then we cannot even measure, except the fact that it was localized, what the impact was. And therefore we live in we're blind to what change we want to drive. And it doesn't even start with insights. Ideally, what you want to do is you have your global insight. You see that, for example, there's a specific attribute of your product that is only understood by 32% of HCPs. You then say in your brand plan, I want at the same time next year that at least 55% of HCPs understand this concept. I create a global content pack for this. I ensure that this global content pack is localized. And then I can measure through my insights again, my Thermo or whatever you're using, if that specific aspect or product attribute has increased. But we're not even doing that. We're just looking at where gaps are. Then we all look at each other and nod, yes, we have a problem. We create content. And we don't look when that content can be localized as well, because we all know that, for example, in France, if you have branded content, that will only reach the HTTP after 6 months because of the local regulations. In the UK, for example, due to ABPI, maybe the way you need to communicate that specific message has to be tweaked. But in the global brand plan, we don't say what we want to achieve. And in the local brand plans, we also don't say how then we want to achieve something based on insights. So that's why we keep saying we're data-driven, data-obsessed. I made a post about this today, that sometimes you should also go and understand why something is not working. But for me, that's really a fundamental problem. And that's why this global to local is not working, because we're not measuring the impact of it, long story short.
Yeah. And local to global isn't working either, right? So I know I'm trying to be like a little bit, pushing the conversation, because that, global can't do that unless they get the data. Some data are also from local countries, and local needs, like sometimes it even starts local. Like, okay, you start with your kind of global concept and idea, but then you also need the local needs to communicate. And Amos, to your point, like, why is the culture environment not there for that open conversation? Is like people don't want to do it because you don't want eyes on you. Why don't you want eyes on you? Like, is it because of like judgment, or the fear of like how you communicate data? It's like I see this come across over and over again, is that, and maybe the reason why we say we're data driven, but once stuff is done, we don't look at the impact because we're afraid to report bad outcome. So because that's what we do, is we're data obsessed, and we use that data to critique performance of teams, departments, and individuals, instead of using data to influence next decisions and optimize. Like, the culture of data is one of fear, because if I make a mistake, I will be blamed potentially. I don't know. Rather than if I don't achieve my target, like, I'm celebrated for communicating it and saying how we'll fix it. It was like, if you spent loads of money on a webinar and nobody came, like, that's just like a bad result. But it should be something's going wrong. What is it? We've understood, we've optimized, we've changed. You know what I mean? What it is that's what's going wrong. Like that I don't know if that's like plays a role in this whole global to local like collaboration and back and forth. Like, is there some kind of culture issue that needs to be solved? I don't know.